Okay, so let's look at this next example where we're talking about finding function values, but we're going to use reference angles like we did, I don't know, in Chapter 2, I believe, when we used reference angles to find other function values around the unit circle. So we're again going to focus on this first quadrant that we have right here. So in this first quadrant, and for the letter A, which I have right here, letter A says I want to find the sine of pi over 6. Well, you know that there's no pi over 6 here in the first quadrant. But where does pi over 6 occur? Okay, 7 pi over 6, excuse me. So let's think about this just for a second. I know that if I go all the way around over here, that this is pi. And pi, which is a whole number, can be represented by the fraction 6 pi over 6. So if I take the difference, let's see, 6 pi over 6. If I take the difference between 7 pi over 6 and 6 pi over 6, then I'm at just pi over 6, which is here in the first quadrant. Okay, so pi over 6 becomes our reference angle for 7 pi over 6, so I can figure out what the sine is of 7 pi over 6, and it is going to be 1/2. Okay, so using reference angles, just like we've done in previous sections, we're going to give the function value. Okay, so let's practice that again. So I'm going to look here at cosine of 4 pi over 3. Okay, cosine of 4 pi over 3 is going to move in this direction, right? It's going in the negative direction. Again, I know that over here at pi, this would technically be 3 pi over 3. So what's the difference between these two values? So, so when I take the difference of these two values, I know that I'm looking at a reference angle that is pi over 3. Okay, pi over 3, the cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2. But I know, because I'm moving in the negative direction 4 pi over 3, that I actually end up here. And I know that the sine of cosine in the second quadrant is negative. So the answer to this question would therefore be negative 1/2. Okay, let's look at 11 pi over 6. Alright, so I'm going to draw myself my picture again. I know that 11 pi over 6, okay, 11 pi over 6 is going to go all the way around, and it's going to be down here in the fourth quadrant, because 2 pi could actually be the same thing as 12 pi over 6, because 12 divided by 6 is 2. Now, what's the difference between 12 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6? Okay, that's pi over 6. So using the reference angle for pi over 6, okay, and the fact that I'm looking for cosecant, okay, so we're doing double work here. Let's see, the reciprocal function value for cosecant would be sine. So I want to know, what is the sine of pi over 6? So looking over here, the sine of pi over 6 is going to be 1/2. Okay. I also know that because I'm down here in quadrant 4, that this is going to be negative 1/2. Therefore, the cosecant would have to be negative 2. So the answer to that value would be negative 2. Okay, so I'm just wanting to show you, okay, and what you're utilizing here are the reference angles that are found in the first quadrant to be able to fill in the values for the remaining 3 quadrants when you're moving around the unit circle.